bottoming up, sort of place-based, bottoms up. Tremendous excitement about that. We do a lot of work around that ourselves. But the reality is that there's, something like 5,000 massive corporations on the planet that very much define and set the terms for the global economy. And any talk about a new economy can't either pretend away the issues that big corporations represent, both positive and negative, nor can we realistically think that we're going to transition the global economy to a new economy without the participation of the large corporates. So this conversation today is kind of dealing with the tough, hard business. In terms of just sort of framing the challenge, we're all very familiar now with the inequality statistics. The one that just blew my mind is that the 80 wealthiest people on the planet now hold the same amount of wealth as the bottom half of the population. The bottom 3.5 billion people have the same amount of wealth as 80 people. And if you actually think about that a little bit, one could even be surprised that the numbers aren't worse, because, of course, we know that almost half of the planet is living in or near poverty. So inequality is a huge issue, and obviously the role of corporations, and particularly the compensation at the top, is part of what's driving that all by any means. And then the second big issue, of course, is the ecosystem crisis. Climate change being just the most visible and newsworthy piece of it. KPMG put out a report recently where they estimated that the 3,000 largest corporations cost the planet $2.1 trillion in 1 year, the year 2008, and it's probably gotten worse since then. And so we've got to figure out how to get our hands around the beast, which is the large corporations. I would argue that the transition to what we like to call regenerative economy will require the involvement of large corporations, particularly their investment capital. I'm an impact investor, but the real investment that's done in the real economy is done by and large by corporations and by governments. So if we can't mobilize government investment and large corporate investment into this transition, we're really just talking to ourselves. I wanted to talk about this idea of regenerative economy, but there isn't time. So what I'd like to do is say two things about it. One, the idea of regenerative economy is to look to living systems and energy networks as the model for how sustainable systems work. And it turns out that we're all sitting here alive and breathing because our bodies are regenerating. They're not sustainable, they're regenerating, which allows us to be sustainable, at least for some long period of time, hopefully. And so our work at Capital Institute with a lot of colleagues is to try to understand what this idea of regenerative means and sort of map it against the way the economy works and see what that would imply for what has to change about the economy, and in particular, what has to change about large corporations, because we know in natural systems, take the food chain, the lions don't keep growing, and the lions don't eat all day, and so there's a right relationship between the lions in the jungle and all the other species. And I think we have in the large corporate sector this idea of endless scaling to endless economies of scale, with really no governance keeping that in check. The way in natural systems there's a natural check. If the lions eat too much of their prey, the lions are going to go hungry. If it's too much prey, the prey will eat too much food, and the prey will adjust. And so we need to find that way to balance the entities in the real economy as well. Why don't I leave it at that? So on this regenerative economy, go to our website. There's a project we do called our Field Guide to Investing in a Regenerative Economy. There's a little bit written about that in terms of what we mean by it. And then there's a series of projects, field guide examples of where we see regenerativeness happening in the real world. And I'm continuing to plug away on a paper on this. It'll be out hopefully this summer, and it'll be on the website. But you'll see sort of there's 8 elements of a regenerative economy that are listed there, and you'll get a flavor of what's about. The other thing I just want to say, and I won't describe it, is that we think that the role of investment, how corporations are owned and governed, is obviously critical. And another thing I'd drive you to on our website is something called Evergreen Direct Investing, which is essentially a method to go around public capital markets and bring real long-term governance and therefore the possibility of long-term responsibility to the large corporate sector. So I'd encourage you to go and check that out as well. So those are my opening comments. I'm now going to turn it to Hunter. Yes.
John posed the question, is there a role for the global corporation in a regenerative economy? I don't know. In part because I don't know what a regenerative economy is. Randy Hayes, founder of Rainforest Action Network, and I were talking last night over a little whiskey about the difference between...
Don't mean to correct you, but it was a lot of whiskey.
It was. The difference between a magic wand conversation and what do we do Monday morning? And frankly, that really is now the only thing that interests me. And then the answer to that is, yes, there is a role for global corporations Monday morning because they're here. And they're driving much of what is causing all of the harm. In the piece that Joe was so kind as to print, I described the humanity as standing on the edge of a crumbling cliff. And Randy's and my old boss, Dave Brower, said when you're standing on the edge of a precipice, the only sane move is to take a step back and turn around and go in a different direction. So is there a role for the corporation in this different direction? And I would argue, yes, in several senses. We need them, they need us. None of us would have gotten here today. None of us would be standing. If you look around you, everything around us was supplied in general by a very large corporation. The school is a corporation. And essentially everything about the world we see around us came from a very large corporation. The mental model most of us hold in our heads of the future is collapse. How are we going to get to the new economy? Well, the old one's going to collapse. Yeah? If that's true, then our job is to be thinking about how do we rebuild when that happens. Randy said, David Suzuki said, none of us are smart enough to know if that will happen or when that will happen. I remember having a conversation in 1995 with Dana Meadows. The savings and loan collapse was underway. And Dana said, I really don't see how this economy can hold together more than another year or so. The 08 collapse. Big banks are bigger now than they were then. The Financial Times had a piece, stock market at record heights. Christine Lagarde saying, but we're a little concerned about growth. Jeremy Grantham saying, expect growth to be 1% or perhaps 0 for the foreseeable future. The mental assumption of the economic system we have is that growth will be at least 3%, maybe 8%. Most pensions are based on the notion of 8% per year growth. So there are some real fundamental shreds in the world that we're dealing with now. How do we begin to come to grips with those? And the principles that a group of us at the Alliance for Sustainability and Prosperity, ASAP4all.org. Join the conversation, please. The principles we're starting to lay out of this edge economy are things like tell the truth, know the truth, full cost accounting. This is the work that Randy's working on now. How do we force companies to say what their impact on the planet is? And conversely, what they are gaining when they behave more sustainably. This is wild-eyed environmentalists at Goldman Sachs tell us that the companies that are the leaders in environment, social, and good governance policy have 25% higher stock value than their less sustainable competitors. Steve Sheath with First Affirmative can tell you that the SRI community is exploding. And John's in impact investing Moving money out of the bad stuff into the good stuff is clearly part of this. But really fundamentally looking at what is the truth in front of us and then acting on that. And I would argue what we need is a strategy of change. How do we get from where we are today, step by bloody step, to where it is that we want to get to? Merely talking about a new economy, Bob was so right. Fuck all what we call it. Call it a banana. What are we going to do tomorrow? And that's the conversation that I would like to see. In that, companies have a big role. I work with companies like Unilever. Paul Pullman said, I'm not going to report quarterly. He said, if you think my managing your company, you as shareholders, managing your company on a 90-day rotation adds core business value, thanks, I don't want you as my owner. Stock dropped 10%. He went on, stock's back. He announced the Sustainable Living Plan, cut their environmental impact in half by 2020, source everything in their feedstock that comes from something grown from sustainable agriculture. And then he turned right around and said, and I have no idea how to do that. Right answer. When a corporate says, and I have no idea how to do that, and then starts pulling people like Mindy Luber of Ceres, and Rick Ridgway of Patagonia, and Andrew Winston, Fred Kirschman from the Leopold Center, Aaron Kramer from Businesses for Social Responsibility, pulling them together and saying, let's figure it out together. That's the kind of company we need more of. And ultimately, now I'm an old firefighter. All fires start small, and all fires go out. So if as a firefighter you're going to kill yourself to try to put a fire out, don't. Fire will go out. You can help it go out. Don't kill yourself over it. All companies start small, and all companies eventually go away. We can all think of companies. Enron was once the darling of the SRI community, and almost overnight it died because it lost legitimacy. If we withdraw legitimacy, these companies will die. Bob was saying that this morning. If we've got them surrounded, so then the question is, what do we do Monday morning? Thanks.
Have some coffee if you've been drinking that whiskey all weekend.
Thank you, John. Good to be here. Good to see some old friends and many new faces. Means I'm getting old. My premise here is that the world's a very blurry place. That the new economy and the old economy are joined at the hip, much like John said in his introductory remarks. We can't avoid it. Even 10 years, 20 years, even if the revolution happens, there will be big corporations, there will be global corporations. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It all depends on the terms and conditions of their engagement with the economy. So, as in any ecosystem, diversity is health. Should be healthy. Mixed sizes, mixed structures, mixed governance. There's no magic bullet here. Small is not always beautiful, and large is not always bad. That's my premise. So I'm going to give you 5 misconceptions and a couple of cases where I think this blurriness is playing out in the real world. So the first one is that the new economy, to restate, is not operating in a vacuum. It's not detached from all manner of players, small, large, medium, in between. And we know from the recent data from the flow of goods, services, information, data, capital, that the world is becoming a closer and closer place. These flows, that is, things that cross borders, are becoming increasingly voluminous, from $25 trillion worth of goods and services capital to $85 trillion This is not going to stop. There will be globalization of the scale, and it needs to be managed. Think of your own life day to day. Most of the people in this room have grown up in the internet generation. You know what's going on within 1 minute in China, Cambodia, and the Philippines. Unheard of a few years ago, certainly in my generation. So you're living in the global world every day of your life. Secondly, global corporations relate to smaller firms, new economy firms included, and many, some positive, some problematic. It's not all good, and it's not all bad. Supply chains, of course, tiny manufacturing facilities supply GM, hopefully safely mixed emission switches. Acquisitions happen all the time. Big guys eat little guys, big guys eat big guys, small guys don't normally eat up the big guys, but strange things have happened. So if you look historically at all these mergers and acquisitions, you see what reasonably called new economy firms like Odwalla, like Ben & Jerry's, a whole raft of internet startups, new ones every week that started in garages. These are all firms created by entrepreneurs, democratically, I would say, often controlled, not necessarily employee-owned, but certainly inclusive kinds of governance and ownership structures, acquired by larger firms who, for many different reasons, no one reason, kids and squelching competition, buying up IP that we want to purchase, whatever. Lots of different reasons. And there's also that linkage between the large and small through sheer, unadulterated market power. We know, if you look at the large sectors, the major business sectors, whether it's retailing, whether it's agribusiness, whether it's computer chips, whether it's mobile and internet service providers, the world increasingly is a concentrated world, where 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 firms worldwide are dominant in these and many other sectors. So the sheer market power is a reality that small firms, including new economy firms, small, everything from farmers markets, compete with major retail suppliers. This is inevitable. So the ebb and flow between the large and the small is a reality, and how that relationship evolves over time is really a challenge that stands before us. Thirdly, new economy firms can be global firms. Global does not necessarily mean big. Global can mean very small. I met a woman last week at a conference, I don't like this one. When her company is Preserve, is she in the audience by any chance? Lori? Okay. So they make toothbrushes and household goods, plates and spoons and forks out of recycled plastic. One of the 5 major plastics that hasn't been very well recycled that they're doing. And there are 10 people, and they're relatively new, and they're selling in 10 countries. 10 countries. Okay. Are they a global company? Not yet. But they're reaching beyond borders flawlessly. How many companies are in that situation? How about Airbnb? How about VRBO, these international hosting firms? Grew up out of nowhere. Now are truly global. There's nothing more global than these firms. You can rent a room in Bangkok. You can go on the website and do it, thanks to Airbnb. So, another firm that I'll speak to again in a second, King Arthur Flour, one of the oldest companies in America, 1792, traces its roots. It's grown from a flour milling firm to what? It now has products on the market, selling its products globally through online purchasing, online retail. And it's publishing books, and it's teaching culinary classes, and it's selling baking, its core business, but doing it in large numbers of countries. A global company, employee-owned. Fourth premise, new economy enterprises are not always new. What they are is astute optimizers of multiple capitals, human capital, social capital, and natural capital, and so on. My dad's business in Worcester, down the road 40 miles, now out of business thanks to the forces of change, big retail boxes, big box stores that put out business, small wholesale firms, which he ran. I look back, and I was thinking the other day, he was in the economy. This was a company invented in 1935. His business was wholesaling to small, what we call today convenience stores. He ran a business that I would, if you saw it, how it operated, the wages it paid, the employee benefits, the dignity in the workplace, 10 people employed. That was a very new economy business. No longer exists because of the forces out there in retailing has evolved. But when he was in business for 40 years, he got basically every attribute of what you would call an economy enterprise today. And there's many others. This King Arthur Flour, absolutely. It's been around about 200 years or more, or 50 years. Another firm, Natura in Brazil, some of you know, often held up as one of the world's great sustainable companies. 1 million associates selling door-to-door cosmetics for mostly to the poor, and most of the associates are poor. And the list goes on. And then finally, I want to say that we do have answers. To Hunter's point, call to arms here. We know the answers to boosting new economy enterprise. We know that certification and fair trade program work. We know that procurement programs by large companies can make a huge difference. We know that sustainability ratings can make a difference, like the YEARS program. We know impact investing. We know how to do antitrust. We just, unfortunately, antitrust in the U.S. and most of the world has basically almost faded away. So we know the instruments. We know what to do. What's lacking is, number one, scaling. How do we go from this 1,000 B corporations to how about 1 million? I mean, 1,000 is nice, but 1,000 is a drop in the bucket. Let's face it. So God bless B Corp, but we need 1 million, not 1,000. And impact investing, 10, 20 billion under management. 10, 20 billion. That's cappuccino money in financial markets. Maybe it's 30 billion. What do I need to talk about trillions? Scaling is the challenge. We have the instruments. We need scaling, and we need political will. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Rebecca, I'm going to keep you to your time limit. I know you'll be precise, like Harvard School.
Good morning. Good morning. I want to talk about Hunter's question. What do we do on Monday morning? And to do that, I want to draw on my background for 21 years as the Eastman Kodak Professor of Management at MIT. So for 21 years, I studied large corporations trying to do new things. In materials, in automotive, in digital. Yes, I worked at Kodak. I worked at Nokia, trying to persuade them that yes, Apple really was a serious problem. That's what I did. I worked with large organizations trying to do new things. So I thought a lot about major transitions. Not a transition on the size of the one we face now, but still pretty big. Going from analog to digital, going from national to global. How do we rethink what these big global corporations might be? And I'm with Alan. I don't think these are going away anytime soon. So my theme is, how does the new economy interact with, work with, change, reform these very large companies? And I have 3 ideas. The first is the simple existence of alternatives. So there might only be 1,000 companies in B Corp, there might only be a few food cooperatives, there might only be a few firms that take the environment seriously, that pay their workforce well, that refuse to cut wages in the face of global competition. That might feel like a fringe, but my work for many years led me to believe that it's the fringe that drives change. That for these large corporations, the most important instigator of change are small firms doing well when they shouldn't be. So why is it that people want to work for these small firms? Why is it that, to Alan's example, some of these firms like Airbnb are growing? What's with these alternatives? Because if you simply go to the large firms and say, the sky is falling, you need to act differently, they say, well, the sky's not falling here, and we're doing pretty well. Excuse me. So, number one source for change is small entities doing something differently and doing it well. So I think the new economy has a hugely important role to play in shifting these large organizations. Second idea, to Alan's point, large corporations, when there's a success, will buy it. So yes, there are many large companies that buy something, sit on it, and sort of throw away the carcass. To talk about why that is. It's not malice, it's just the nature of large organizations. But what they are hoping to do is use these acquisitions, use the key people to transform. So Hunter knows the story better than I do. Unilever bought Ben & Jerry's. A lot of screaming and yelling about, yeah, it wasn't the old Ben & Jerry's, and they... But my reading of what happened to Unilever is Ben & Jerry's had an instrumental effect on a $60 billion euro corporation.
They bought Ben & Jerry's in order to do that, and they explicitly say to the guys from Ben & Jerry's, challenge us, help us transform the whole company, right?
So my takeaway from that is it's tempting to say big, bad, evil, horrible. It's heterogeneous, right? The right large companies, the ones that really want to make this shift, and they are out there, those are good things to be bought by. And to set up a unit and then be acquired and integrated and have this kind of opportunity to have an effect on scale, that's a second really important mechanism. And my third and last, and I know John is keen to get into the conversation. My third and last is political. Because I don't think we'll get real change until we have a price for carbon. And
Can you repeat that?
Sorry, that we need a price for carbon. That throwing CO2 out the back door, it should not be free. That using up raw materials at less than their replacement cost should not be appropriate. We need capitalism that's properly priced, and John is all over this. Right? So that environmental capital is not free, and Hunter's written several books on this. Environmental capital is not free, human capital is not free. We need proper pricing, we need real regulation, we need control over the economy. This is not a pipe dream. Just think of, say, Scandinavia or Germany, which are not perfect, but are in many ways in much better balance. Think of the US economy in the 50s. Again, not possible, not perfect, but in many ways in much better balance. This is not an unreasonable goal. This is a feasible political goal. And the new economy is strength. So I think we should be thinking of ourselves as part of a political movement as well as an economic movement. That we need to agitate, we need to drive for local change, we need to drive for statewide change, we need to drive for federal change. So, 3 ideas. 1, it's examples that get the large economy to change. 2, being bought is, into the mothership with your insidious ideas. Excellent move. And 3rd, we need to change the rules. We have potentially the strength and the drive to be part of the broad-based social movement we need to drive for political change. Thank you very much.
Anyone see us well enough if we stay seated, or would you like us to continue standing up?
It's hard to see from the back row.
That's okay.
All right. Why don't we stand up, just sort of stand up and down, but not. That's going to be too weird, but I think it's better than marching up and back. We're going to take questions in 1 second on this session. I just want to, since I am the moderator, I get a preference here. I want to just add a quote from Einstein. I'm all for, we know what we need to do, we need to scale it. I totally agree with that. The Monday morning, I'm all for that. But I actually don't think we know what to do yet. And so it's not that means let's all sit around a table and think about what to do. We absolutely need to do what we know we need to do, and we need to do that Monday morning. And that includes, by the way, $30 trillion of investment in alternative energy. Let's get started in a serious way. And let's get the banking system aligned with that, and let's get the development banking institutions aligned with that, and let's get our central banks aligned with that. But that doesn't mean we don't need to wrestle with this really hard, complex challenge. And that's where this work in regenerative economy is rooted. And Einstein once said, it is theory which determines what we're allowed to see. And I believe that to get the political movement going, we need a new story, a new narrative that is understandable and rooted in what feels true and what feels right. And so we're kind of locked in this reductionist shareholder value paradigm, which is taught at the business schools in this town, and it makes it impossible to see alternatives. So that's the argument in favor of new economy and new names and new words, because words and ideas matter. I know you're burning. I'm definitely going to call you. So anyway, that's just a compliment to the let's get going on Monday morning idea. So the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to ask you all to give us or participate in what's been said so far. You can ask questions if you want, but really more just feel free to make comments. And then I'm going to cut that off, and then I've got some questions for these guys, and we're going to continue the conversation. So yes, sir.
Okay,
Short though.
I'll try to keep it short, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, my name is Stuart Scott.
And your affiliation?
Various, but I work under the aegis of an NGO in the orbit of the United Nations.
Okay.
But I'm a project specialist, and I give the wide berth.
Got it.
So currently I'm focused, one of my projects is to try to elevate the awareness of ecological economics on a global scale. What you discussed, some of what you discussed sounded more like environmental economics, where if you put a price on trees, everything will work out. Well, the ecological economists say some things cannot be quantitative. Extinction of a species cannot be quantified.
Right.
And that environmental economics does not solve the problem.
Yeah.
So I was discussing with this young lady who's studying economics and sustainability here at Northeastern. Is ecological economics being taught here yet? And so it's beginning to grow, but what you just said about the inability to see what the theory doesn't encompass is a systemic problem that was put into place by the wealthy capitalists, I'm told, in the 20th century, where they bought the chair of the Chicago Business School, University of Chicago, and other chairmanships, so they forced out the old guard. So my question, if there is one here, is, and my job is to elevate the role of ecological economics in the paradigm to the central banks who have been specifically suppressing it.
Yeah. I'm going to try to keep us rolling rather than us all respond. Yeah, rather than respond to that, let's keep it moving. And they're not meant to be questions, short statements. Yes, in the front. Again, say your name and.
Thank you so much. My name is Eleanor Fort, and I work with Ceres on the policy team, but I'm here in a personal capacity. I'm really interested in this conversation, and I'm happy to hear you guys call out Unilever and specifically talk about the need to mobilize a political movement to have big businesses start internalizing their externalities. We work closely with Unilever and Ben & Jerry's, and we know them well as leaders in this movement, and they are helping others make the economic case, the business case about why transitioning early and being early adopters in a clean economy is going to be good for their business long term. My question is, how do we pull up the laggards? So there's going to be leaders like Unilever, but how do we get, in my mind, we have to have policy to set the low bar to bring up the others and make them do something that they just might not do no matter what the good business case or pro-environment or pro-labor case is.
Great, thanks. Let's go over here. Yes, sir.
So my name is Daniel Cronovet. I'm a software engineering graduate student. I wanted to talk to Mr. Henderson, to write points. So we talked about the importance of influencing. You talked about the importance of influencing large organizations as a way to make a big impact. I think it's very perceptive. However, I'm sort of talking about Spotter's company and how it was a.
Still can't hear you.
It was a place that really elevated the individual employees because it was a place to treat them with respect. So with a large corporation, even if the corporation as a whole is motivated to do good work, it seems as when a company scales, the workplace becomes not a place that elevates the individual because the organization becomes more bureaucratic. Is there any way for the organization to retain that kind of uplifting aspect of working with the employees as it scales, or that's something that will always be lost?
I'm trying to think, are we going to be able to hold some of these questions?
I think I could do one more. I don't know what
Okay. In the back there, yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Karina. I'm doing some work with Tufts University at the moment on sustainable business. Thank you
Hi,
so
Karina.
much. Yeah, hi there, John. How's it going? Thanks so much for your presentations. So, since I'm doing some research, I don't have the luxury of the Monday morning issue you guys describe. I understand you're dealing with this as your job. I can actually have the kind of longer term view and actually start thinking, what's the world that we want rather than the reality of the world that we have? And I understand that we need to engage with these corporations, we can't pretend they don't exist, but it seems to me that we need to answer the question of, are they the optimal form in the world that we want? So in the kind of regenerative economy, do we want an organisation structured like Unilever to be the main provider of foodstuffs? It's a very big question. And my inclination, my thought on this is that there's a fundamental incompatibility between ecological sustainability and public liability, the large number of shares and public trading. And I think these three elements have basically create a corporate structure that's designed and needs to grow, and that's completely at odds with the need for the kind of macro steady state. So I'd like the board, you guys to speak to this. What do you think about the actual structure of the company and potential tension with ecology? Thank you.
All right, let's stop there and ask everyone to reflect on sort of pick one of those that you really want to go after. Maybe Alan, do you have one of those you want to respond to?
No, I agree.
Start with one. Keep going.
God bless Unilever. If I hear Unilever once more, I feel better. And I know Paul Holden, and they're a fantastic company. The question is, where's the next 10,000 Unilevers? So we got to correct that now. And the other comment quickly is dignity in large organizations is a big challenge. But there are examples through clever organizational forms for unitizing basically large corporations into smaller parcels, if you will, that retain the sense of consciousness to fellow workers, sense of dignity, sense of respect, that even though the aggregate company may be 10 or 20 or 30,000, there's ways to do it.
So I'm hearing one question actually, which is if you had a blank sheet of paper and you were designing the kind of system we would like to live in, it probably wouldn't look like this one. And so should we be trying to leap to that one, or should we be trying to reform, wiggle this one? And is there a danger if you try and reform, wiggle this one that you never get to where you really want to get to? So I think that's a deep question. I will tell you what I believe. We don't have time, I won't tell you why I believe it. I believe strongly we're not going to leave. I just don't think it's going to happen. So I'm a heavy-duty reformist. Now remember, I'm a professor at the Harvard Business School, so structurally you'd expect that. So I'm a heavy-duty reformist. As part of that, though, my main line of research is what I call high ambition or high commitment organizations. I'm on the board of a center for the high ambition called the Center for Higher Ambition Leadership. I work with firms beyond Unilever, of which there are at least 50, where they describe themselves as really trying to run the company differently. I'm sure many people know Conscious Capitalism and Whole Foods. I have my political differences with John Mackey, but very interesting approach. So do I think it's possible? Yes. But I don't think it's possible for every company to go there until we change the rules. So to me, the big issue is changing the rules so that we can get behind these vanguard and make that vanguard way of doing things the whole way of doing things. And I believe, and this may well be wrong, that if we had 20 or 30% of the major global corporations run as if the world was valuable, humans were valuable, then we'd have a lever to change the rest of the world. Ecological economics, I'm completely there, but for me, it's much further down the road. But I'm a heavy-duty reformist.
Andre, are you a leaper or a reformer?
Yes. I'm unreasonable. And we don't know. This is David Suzuki's point, that the system could come down tomorrow and the system could endure as it did after Dana's and my conversation. And I think we need to hold in our mind that tension. It could do either, and we need to be running on both tracks. So what is a world that works for 100% of humanity, as Bucky said? What is it? And we need people thinking about that. And we need those of us, Ceres particularly, BSR, that work in the bellies of these big companies. Is Unilever sustainable? No! And they would be the first to tell you. Is Wal-Mart sustainable? Fuck no! And they've probably done more to drive more sustainable practices into the supply chain than any of us. So, to some extent, you take what you can get your hands on and drive forward at the same time that you're trying to reconceptualize how it goes. I work with Bob Costanza, he's my immediate intellectual partner, on how do we embed these principles of ecological economics into all of our thinking. And that I think is the real challenge for us as we do the pragmatic daily work of what is sustainable soy? And can soy ever be sustainable? Or should it be algae oil or any of the other issues that we deal with these big companies and their supply chains? We have to be holding in our head the whole system. And always going back to Dana Meadows and whole system thinking in systems. And then pushing on every lever we can find. And windows open and they close. Right now, there is a big window opening in the death of the electric utility industry. They're talking about it, the papers are talking about it, called the death spiral. Why? Because all of you who put solar on your roof, because of Jigar Shah, Sun Edison, Carbon War Room, because of Citibank, about a month ago, came out with a report, Citigroup, the era of renewables, forward 10-year price of gas, roughly 11 cents a kilowatt hour, forward 10-year price of solar, roughly 10 cents a kilowatt hour. Citi said it's over. Solar wins. What do you do if you're a utility? So RWE, the big utility in Germany, said, fine, we're going to be a distributed utility. We're going to take from distributed generation and send back out to where people want it. There's a solution. And the 20 biggest utilities in Europe have lost, $600 billion in the last couple of years because of the rise of renewables across Europe. Siemens says the future of Europe is a pan-European smart grid. Big wind off the North German and Danish coast, wave off Scotland. Scotland says we'll be 100% renewable by 2020. Solar wave off Portugal, solar across North Africa, the south. I think Greece is going to rebuild itself with renewable energy. We'll see if I'm right on that. And then smart houses, smart cars, the batteries in the cars are the backup for the whole system. Siemens sees this as their corporate future and are driving to make it happen. So, go Siemens. We need the companies that have the scale to do this kind of thing to be doing it. We need to be celebrating them, and we need to be punishing the laggards and calling them out, and to the extent that we can with the gridlocked Congress, getting regulations in place. We, most of all, need to become a self-aware political movement if we're going to get that done. If you have not, watch the video of Elizabeth Warren with Tom Piketty. It's on moveon.org. Watch that video.
Yeah. So I'd like to, and we'll come back. I'd like to respond to the two questions about the ecological economics and the ownership structure. I think on the ecological economics, I'm a huge student of that whole group, as you may know, and I think it's again not an either or. I think if the world granted me one wish today, it would be to put a price on carbon. Not because I think putting a price on carbon is the solution to all our problems, but it's probably the most powerful wedge to shift the battleship. But that doesn't mean that we can put a price on everything, every ecosystem services, and factor it into our neoliberal economic paradigm and go home and play golf. We absolutely need to rethink economics, as Herman Daly and all of his colleagues have been doing, and extend that thinking, which I think is only sort of half done. On the ownership question, I obviously agree with the premise of your question, and here again I would point people toward the white paper we have on our website, Evergreen Direct Investing. It's a method of investing that enables investors to earn a decent return in alignment or lining up the cash flows of mature enterprises with the liabilities of mature or of large pension funds, for example. So stable cash flows coming in, stable cash flows going out, and the underlying cash flows don't need to grow in order to create that, that matching. And secondly, it enables partnerships between investors, and real enterprises, rather than in today, out tomorrow speculation in trading markets. And again, this is a paradigm shift. We think of public companies or big companies as needing to be public. Well, there's lots of big private companies that manage themselves very different than big public companies. And so we need a new method to enable large institutional investors to become investors again rather than speculators. And again, there's a long story on that on our website if you're interested. I'm going to cut it now and ask these guys a few questions I had, and then we'll come back and go back to you guys, so if that's all right. Where do I start? Let's see. Let me start, Alan, with you. You've been working on the kind of corporate purpose and corporate transparency for literally decades. I can't think of anyone who knows more about that subject than you do and has been involved in more of it than you do. And the premise is, if you bring transparency to corporations, you shine a light on things, that's the theory of change is shining a light on this stuff will cause management to manage things differently. And I'm curious, after 2 decades and lots of progress on this, I would argue the truth is it hasn't worked yet. And so my question to you is the theory wrong that the transparency is going to cause change, or why is it that it's taking so long?
Well, when I started working in that field, GRI and other related projects, I never thought it was a panacea. To me, good information and transparency was a necessary but not sufficient condition to trigger change. And I think history has pretty much proved that. We have today thousands and thousands of reporters using GRI framework and other frameworks out there. So the world is much richer with a lot better, a lot more information. So we know what companies are doing more. We don't know perfectly. Take GM, for example. It's not a perfect situation, but we're better off with more information and the better. But to assume that it's a game changer or a world changer is not the case. I think what helps on the flip side of the sort of pragmatic information reporting, sort of almost a mundane practice these days, if you're not reporting these days, you're really, the question is, why aren't you rather than why are you? And that is a major shift from 10 years ago. Well, that's the good news. But, the old saying, if you don't know where you're going, every road will get you there. I think that's the point of the new narrative. Reporting, transparency, that's part of the new narrative. But the new narrative, of course, has to be much bolder, much more full-bodied, much more creative than that. We have to, a lot of work Tellus Institute is, in fact, those scenarios. So we're thinking about 2050, and we're asking, and beyond, and we're asking what should corporations, what's the role, the design, the purpose of corporations within that broader paradigm of great transition. So we need storytellers. There's some at this conference. And I take transparency as sort of that starting line to deep reformism is what I would call good transparency.
Good. So Hunter, I have a question for you. I noted in my preparation that you won the Right Livelihood Award, which is described as the alternative Nobel Prize, when I was in the training program at J.P. Morgan back in 1983. And so you've been on this beat for quite a while, as we said earlier. And normally when I hear you talk, it's in alignment with what we've heard you say today. There's kind of a gung-ho, we can do this. The name of one of your recent book is The Way Out, Kickstarting Capitalism to Save Our Economic Ass. Is that right?
Precisely right.
And yet, in private conversations with you, I've detected some uncertainty about whether you think the big corporate leaders either get it or are up to the task to lead this change. And so I'm going to ask you to sort of put the kick our economic ass aside and talk very personally about your honest belief in whether the corporate leaders have what it takes.
I don't know. And that was our conversation. I don't know if there are enough Paul Pullmans. And I don't know if there is enough time. We're losing every major ecosystem. We're losing badly. You read the recent IPCC reports. You listen to people like Jim Lovelock. He said, it's over. Civilization's gone for 100,000 years. Sylvia Earle said, what we do in the next 10 years is more important than what humanity does in the next 10,000 years. 10 years is no amount of time. When people talk about all the damn awards, like if I were any damn good, we'd have solved these problems. Hemingway said, everything is your fault if you're any damn good.
Yeah, look where that got him.
Maybe where he wants to be, eh? I don't know. I do know that what we have now is killing the planet, it's killing people, it's killing all of us. The only way that I have found, I started out, my dad mentored Cesar Chavez, my mom, and Martin King. My mom worked with John L. Lewis in the coal fields. I've been at this since I was really little, like 5. Went to a demonstration where the Quakers sailed the little boat, the Golden Rule, supposedly into the nuclear test site. They got arrested in Hawaii, never made it, but I've worked in politics, I've worked for candidates, I'm a lawyer, I've tried the legal system, I've tried every leverage point I can find, and none of them have worked. I think we've gotten more traction if you can find a leader like a Ray Anderson when he has his epiphany, and if you can pitch them a business case. And I think that's what this movement has been missing. If you can pitch them a business case, and they have the spear in the chest, and they want to change, then you can start to drive change very rapidly. But is it fast enough? I don't know. And will doing that get us to the world that works for 100% of humanity? Probably not. In which case, what all of us are talking about, this conversation that Costanza, Dr. Jackie McGlade, chief scientist of the UK, and Joe's in on it. If you guys join this conversation, what is it, and what are the next steps? I do think we can answer that question.
So I'd like to, Rebecca, pivot off the business case for sustainability, seeing as you're the Harvard Business School professor here, and ask you, so I come out of finance. I can have a conversation with a finance professor as good as the best of them. And I've been extremely frustrated at how difficult it is to penetrate this, what I would call religion about shareholder value. And it's not because finance professors are either bad people or dumb people. They're certainly not dumb people. But they genuinely have this belief system that the business case for sustainability needs to translate into a higher stock price this year. And maybe that's a little unfair, but of course the markets want it to translate into a higher stock price the next time you announce your quarterly earnings. And so if you could reflect again in an honest way, as honest as you can be on camera, about the ideology of, in particular, the finance division of the business schools, which as I understand tend to be the powerful, dominant force inside the elite business schools, and help us understand if and how we can crack this ideology of shareholder value being truth in the business world.
So I think on this I can be very optimistic. So at the business school I teach a class called Reimagining Capitalism. We currently have 200 people enrolled. That's roughly 20% of the second year class, and next year we hope to have 300 people enrolled, and to take it from there. And as part of teaching that course, we've been doing a lot of talking to CEOs about shareholder value. And what's interesting is I think there are very few companies in the world, and here I'm going to disagree with both you and Al, I think there are very few companies in the world where the CEO wakes up going, I'm going to maximize shareholder value today.
I agree.
I totally agree with
yeah,
that.
no, most companies are run on what we would call
The
those
financial analysts and the business school finance professors.
yeah, but I think that may not be as much of a problem as one thinks. Because what we care about are real decisions in the world. And most corporations are run on some variant of stakeholder principle. People are worried about their customers and their employees and their suppliers and their communities, not as worried as we might like, and there's a lot to be said for changing the regulatory environment, as I've said. But I think the ideological war, I think there are two things to be said about the ideological war. One is, I think it's very important to understand there's a reason it's in place, and that the focus on shareholder value and on sort of hardcore economics is read by people in that tradition as having been one of the reasons 1 billion people are out of poverty in the last 20 years. They read modern capitalism as a huge success. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that perspective. One of the things I learned as being the Eastman Kodak Professor of Management is you don't get anywhere telling the incumbents that they're stupid and stuck. And that's not helpful. It's not true. You have to understand why the dominant system is in place, understand what works about it, and begin to work with it. At least that's my perspective. And so I think we're seeing a lot of movement. I was part of a group that ran a seminar this spring at Harvard called Business and Public Goods, which was about this question. We have, 50 faculty at the business schools signed up on that mailing list, and faculty from across the university engaged, and trying to find a way to talk about our economic system in a way that preserves what's been amazing about it. We really don't want to go back to Soviet-style communism or state planning. We really, really don't. And one of the reasons people respond so badly sometimes when you say, I want to lose shareholder value, is they say, oh, you want crony capitalism, where you want to just run your company without controls, and that didn't work terribly well either. So really engaging with that conversation in a helpful way, I think it's very optimistic. And the reason I'm optimistic, it's so much fun to be on this panel because I feel like these are the pioneers and I'm the reluctant reformer dragged to the table. But I think of myself as a symptom that there's a broader shift in the culture which is very interested in these ideas and can see that what we're doing unadulterated is not going to work.
Okay, let's go back out to the man in the front. Yep.
Ma'am.
The young lady.
No, that's not right either.
By the way, we have about 10 minutes, so we're
I'll
going
get
to
right to it. I'm
real
Leslie. I'm
concise.
with Green Century. We are the only mutual fund company owned by environmental groups. And the parts that I wanted to add to the conversation is that we have actually found that companies manage their environmental risk, change things in their supply chain. They actually do perform better, not just better because we feel better about them, but they actually manage other risks better and then offer better returns for their investors. So I think that there are actual both moral and political and then economic reasons for companies to do that. And I think there's more and more of that happening all the time. And the other part that I wanted to inject is around shareholder advocacy, in that it is surprisingly, having worked more on the nonprofit side for decades, it's surprisingly interesting to me how actually accessible the companies are and how open many of them are to making changes in their practices. And they won't change a core business practice, so, Starbucks won't stop selling coffee, but they will change their sourcing of palm oil. And this year we worked with Kellogg and Wal-Mart to do the same thing, and it's not like the biggest impact, sometimes it is practical, but those things actually can drive it in coordination with NGO pressure, and I think that's just an important way as the one path that Kellogg is not going away and is still going to sell Pop-Tarts and Pringles or whatever, but they can actually stop carbon emissions in Indonesia.
Just so, again, so everyone knows, the whole schedule has been shifted back 10 or 15 minutes, so feel free to leave if you really want to, but don't feel you need to in order to not miss the next session. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Herman Green with the Center for Economic Societies in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And another way of coming at our critique of the system is through the monetary system and the debt-based economy. And I wondered if you had any comments on that.
Yeah.
Janice Paye with iStartup. We bring innovation to communities, educational institutions, and organizations. And I need a little bit of a reality check because I think there is a solution in front of us that we're not taking advantage of to take the 10,000 or 50,000 sort of Unilevers in the world. And one trend that I look at all the time, and I talk to Economic Development Commission people about this, is the number of virtual employees. So right now, Forrester put out a research that said 34 million people right now work virtually. So in third places from the corporations in which they're full-time employed by. And they're saying by 2016, I guess that's right next, it's coming up soon, 63 million. Okay, and all these people are not working from home. They're working from third places like co-working spaces and maker spaces, mostly co-working spaces because the majority of these are knowledge employees. So I think that we can take advantage by creating a really great culture in these co-working spaces. And that's most of the co-working spaces that I know of have a really great culture, but most of them are very entrepreneurial focused. So these employees, these long-term executives from these organizations don't feel as welcome in these co-working spaces, but they need to be there. So for 2 days ago, I brought 25 Turkish executive MBAs to these co-working spaces. I'm talking about productivity and all this other kind of stuff. And the thing that they mentioned the most that they thought was amazing was the freedom that they felt they can, that the people in the co-working spaces had by sharing ideas, communicating with one another. Corporate culture change is very difficult. But when a good portion or a tipping point of their employees are decentralized in these co-working spaces, maybe something quickly can happen.
Cool. Thank you. Over here. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
I'm Simon Eddie with the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation, and I've been a consultant. I've helped organize meetings in a lot of major corporations, banks, Pfizer, that kind of place. And I think the resource we're leaving on the table is that corporations are not us and them. They're made up of human beings just like us. And the thing that always struck me right between the eyes when I was consulting is I would be very upfront about my own values, liberal, progressive, Democrat. And one by one they would say to me, I really want to. And so I would begin to connect them to each other within the corporation. What I'm trying to say is there are so many people working there and they have to live with this dissonance of their values versus what they think is the mythology of what a corporation has to do. And we need to have the conversation to give them alternative business models and a way to talk those values and get into alignment with themselves. There's a fifth column there and we need to have it.
So corporations are people.
Yes, in the way back. Ben Piatelli, perfect segue. We've all heard of Citizens United and the separation of powers. Two major things that are crucial for us to address in the new economy.
Thank you. In the way back.
I'm Darshi and I represent Blue Dot. And I feel hearing the energy in the space, it's awesome. There are so many initiatives that are happening worldwide. There are so many corporations in the mainstream shifting practices. My key question for us is, what if maybe, just maybe, we are shuffling deck chairs while Titanic is sinking? And so there are various disconnects that I could pick up, but the key being that the economics that we currently follow is based on an ancient assumption that growth is unlimited, whereas we live on a finite planet. So what do we need to do to address that disconnect first, and then look at how then we embody what practice? So that's my question.
Thank you for reminding us of that. Yes. Sir, right in front.
My name is David Van Cedars. I'm a sustainable business entrepreneur in Vancouver. And one of the comments you mentioned at the very beginning was how we do need to have the market power of these large corporations. And so what about the idea of, and we need to get some of these companies to scale that are doing good things to have that market power. So what about taking the idea of in a collaborative model like Mondragon in Spain, where there are 200 different companies. They are involved in different businesses. They have an umbrella and they make $1 billion, and they are actually meaningfully reducing the unemployment in their area, and actually figuring out a way to get a bunch of small companies to collaborate under some kind of umbrella with shared values to have that market power quickly, still have their own autonomy, as in Mount Monaghan, and promulgate that idea out to many different countries and regions, and as a strategy.
All right, so I'm afraid we're out of time. We can do this, I'm sure, for another hour. What I would suggest is I know I'll be around afterward if you want to keep the conversation going. I know Rebecca at least has to run, but if others can hang around, we can continue when we're done. What I'd like to do to wrap up, though, is to ask each of us 2 questions, and your response needs to be in literally a minute at most. The first question is, well, the first thing is, share kind of your closing thoughts on this conversation. And if in the process of doing you want to respond to one of those questions, great. And the second thing is I want to ask each of you, if you had one wish related to this issue, what would it be? And so, Hunter, why don't we start with you, since you're quick on your feet.
What is your money doing? Your personal money. If it's not with Green Century or First Affirmative or Principium or one of these, you aren't being as active as you can be. I was recently called by a company that had another SRI fund lodge a shareholder resolution. And what we did was make them a business case pitch. They happen to have restaurants, so we said take low-cost, no-cost measures, use it to capitalize more progressively ambitious measures. The CFO said, why? I said, because it's free money. He said, I'm not capital constrained. He said, make me a proposition of everything you want to see us do at roughly the cost of opening a new restaurant. We got a 36% ROI. His new restaurant would be 22% ROI. The company's now doing it. Would not have happened had Calvert, in this case, not lodged a shareholder resolution. So here's one thing you all can do. If you have any money in a retirement fund, put it with an SRI fund. What's my one wish? You know the answer to that.
Okay.
Alan.
Well, on the action front, somebody, I can't remember in this very rich discourse, said, I think it was Rebecca, said, at the end of the day, this is a political movement. This is a political movement at the end of the day. And I do firmly believe that. I think that we can take these steps, as we're all trying to do one by one, but until the stakes are raised to the level, I was drawing a privilege of interviewing Mary Robinson recently. She said the biggest moment of political will, one of the biggest moments of political will in the history of this planet, was the years 1946 and 7 and 8. And 3 things happened. The Declaration of Human Rights, the formation of the United Nations, and the introduction of the creation of the Marshall Plan. It was a moment in time when everyone was on the same page for great aspirations. Great aspirations. Still struggling as we are years later, of course, but the great aspirations have to be a part of everyone's mind from the moment you get up in the morning. So the trick in my life, I think probably many in this room, is you think about what you're doing Monday morning, but you have down the road a grand. Don't shy away from grandiosity. I don't. No.
What's your wish? What's your one wish?
Lunch.
Thank you. Every time I come to something like this, I am awed and overwhelmed by the commitment and passion in the room. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And my wish is we have 100,000 people in New York on September 21st asking for a carbon regime. So please join me, get to New York. It's really important and it's the beginning of something big.